The narrow road curved endlessly through a valley that seemed to fold in on itself, its silence broken only by the crunch of tires over gravel. Nadia's hands tightened on the steering wheel as she followed the dim glow of her GPS, its robotic voice calmly instructing her deeper into the unfamiliar countryside. She had booked the Airbnb 3 weeks earlier, convinced by glossy photos of a renovated farmhouse tucked away from the city. It had looked like a retreat, quiet, isolated, with rustic stone walls and windows glowing with warmth. Yet, now, in the pale wash of her headlights, the surrounding landscape appeared stark and unwelcoming, as though every tree bent toward the road, watching. After 2 hours of driving in near total darkness, the farmhouse finally emerged from the shadows, its outline sharp against the starless sky. A single porch light flickered above the front door, casting long fingers of shadow across the yard. The driveway was empty, save for the crunch of her own car rolling over the stones, and the windows reflected nothing but blackness. She cut the engine, and the silence that followed pressed against her ears. Nadia sat there for a moment, hesitating, unsure why her chest tightened with unease. She reminded herself that country homes always looked eerie at night, that the photos had shown the place in daylight, bathed in warmth. Inside, the house greeted her with the scent of aged wood and faint dampness, like a building that had been shut up too long. The entryway was dim, the single overhead bulb humming faintly as she set her suitcase down. A guest book lay open on a side table, its pages filled with neat, looping signatures and glowing remarks about cozy nights and charming solitude. She traced her fingers along the last entry, dated nearly a year ago. A chill crawled up her arms when she noticed a faint smudge of what looked like dirt, or something darker, across the margin. Shaking it off, she told herself people often forget to leave reviews online, and not every guest signed these books. Still, she shut it quickly and carried her bag upstairs. The bedroom was as advertised, a large wooden bed, thick quilts, and a wide window looking out into the night. But when Nadia pulled back the curtain, she found herself staring into nothingness. The glass reflected only her own faint outline and the room's dim lamplight, but the darkness beyond seemed to press forward, like something tangible. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw the outline of movement near the tree line, but when she blinked, the yard was empty again. Shaking her head, she laughed softly at herself, muttering about overactive imaginations and horror movies. Still, she slid the latch on the window firmly shut before climbing into bed. Sleep didn't come easily. The old house creaked and shifted with every passing gust of wind, its boards groaning as if footsteps pressed against them in far-off rooms. Twice, Nadia sat up, convinced she'd heard something, a faint knock, the sound of something dragging lightly against the floor below. Each time, she forced herself to lie back down, telling herself it was the house settling. Yet, just as her eyes began to close, a sound distinct and deliberate cut through the quiet, the unmistakable creak of the front door opening. Nadia froze in her bed, every muscle tightening as the faint echo of the door's hinges carried up the staircase. She strained her ears, trying to catch another sound beneath the weight of her own heartbeat. For several seconds, there was nothing. The silence pressed down again, thicker than before, but it didn't comfort her. Slowly, she reached over to the bedside table, her fingers fumbling until they found her phone. Its cold screen flared to life, illuminating her anxious face. The signal bar flickered, one bar, sometimes none. She muttered a quiet curse. Even if she wanted to call someone, she wasn't sure the call would go through. She forced herself out of bed, the quilt dragging along the creaky floorboards. Every step seemed impossibly loud in the hush of the house. Nadia moved cautiously toward the bedroom door, pausing with her hand on the knob. What if someone really had come inside? What if she opened the door and found a stranger standing at the bottom of the staircase, waiting? The thought sent a shiver racing down her spine. She tried to convince herself that maybe the wind had rattled the frame, that these old houses were full of noises. Still, her instincts screamed otherwise. Summoning what courage she could, she opened the bedroom door a crack and peered into the hallway. The air smelled faintly of earth and damp wood, stronger than before, as if a door really had been opened to the night. She stepped out, careful to avoid the squeaky spots in the floorboards, her phone's glow barely cutting through the dark. The staircase loomed at the end of the hall, its shadowed railings twisting downward like something skeletal. When she leaned forward slightly, she thought she caught movement, a shift of shadow near the front door. Her pulse spiked. She quickly ducked back into the safety of the hall, pressing her back against the wall, chest heaving. After several long minutes of stillness, Nadia decided she couldn't just linger in fear. She descended the stairs one step at a time, each creak sounding louder than the last. The entryway came into view, the guest book still open on the table, the doorframe visible in the weak porch light. And that's when she noticed it. The front door was closed, but the lock was undone. She remembered locking it. She was certain she had. Her hand trembled as she reached for the deadbolt and slid it back into place. "Old locks," she whispered shakily, trying to reassure herself. Maybe it slipped. But the explanation felt thin, fragile against the weight of her growing dread. She lingered in the entryway, listening. Then came a faint sound from the living room, the soft scuff of something moving across the wooden floor. Nadia's breath hitched as she turned her head. Through the archway, the living room sat in shadows, furniture hulking in the dark. She stared at the blackened space, her body refusing to move, when suddenly, the faintest sound of breathing drifted out to meet her. Not her own, low, steady, deliberate. Nadia's throat went dry as she stood frozen in the entryway. The sound of that breathing seemed to stretch across the room, filling the empty spaces between the furniture, pressing against her ears until she couldn't deny it anymore. Her phone's glow felt pitiful, swallowed whole by the shadows. She raised it higher, the screen's light bouncing weakly off the edges of the living room doorway. "Hello?" she whispered, her voice thin and trembling, more a test of her own sanity than an actual question. There was no answer, but the breathing stopped abruptly, as though whoever, or whatever, was in there realized it had been heard. The silence that followed was worse. Her entire body tingled with the instinct to run, but running meant turning her back to the darkness, meant exposing herself. Slowly, Nadia reached for the light switch on the wall, her hand shaking so badly she brushed the plaster twice before finding it. She flicked it on. A single bulb above the living room snapped to life, casting a weak amber glow over the space. Empty chairs, an old wooden coffee table, and a fireplace with ashes long gone cold came into view. Everything appeared exactly as it should, ordinary, harmless. And yet, the air still felt thick, charged, like someone was holding their breath just out of sight. Nadia stepped into the living room cautiously, sweeping her phone's light into the corners that the bulb didn't reach. The shadows retreated grudgingly, leaving nothing behind. She let out a shaky exhale and shook her head. Maybe she was overtired, maybe her mind was building monsters out of silence. But just as her heartbeat began to slow, her eyes fell on something near the far corner of the room, a chair pushed slightly askew. She could have sworn it hadn't been that way when she first glanced in. Kneeling closer, she noticed something on the wooden floor beneath it, faint scuff marks, as though it had been dragged. Her pulse climbed again, each beat echoing in her ears. "Old furniture shifts," she muttered, her voice breaking the silence if only to reassure herself. But her gaze darted back to the guest book on the entryway table, to the strange smudge she'd seen earlier. A thought came unbidden, unwelcome. What if she wasn't the first guest to hear noises in this house? What if the glowing reviews written in that book weren't the whole story? She fought back the rising tide of panic and forced herself to stand, heading back toward the staircase. She needed to get upstairs, lock the bedroom door, and wait for morning, but as her foot reached the bottom stair, the house spoke again, this time in no uncertain terms. From somewhere above her, directly overhead, came the sharp sound of footsteps. Not the casual groan of wood settling, not the wind through rafters, but deliberate steps pacing across the floor of the very bedroom she had just left. Nadia's stomach dropped as the footsteps above her head grew more distinct. The sound was steady, deliberate, as if someone were pacing the exact length of the bedroom she had just left. Every hair on her arm stood on end, and her grip on the stair railing tightened until her knuckles ached. She held her breath, waiting for the steps to stop, waiting for any sign that she was mistaken. But they didn't stop, they only changed direction, heading slowly toward the bedroom door. Her bedroom door. The one she had left wide open, her phone screen dimmed, forcing her to tap it again, the light jittering across the walls. For one irrational moment, she thought about calling out, demanding to know who was there, but the words caught in her throat. If she spoke, she would have to accept an answer. The silence of the countryside pressed in around her, broken only by the creak of boards above. Then it happened, a sharp thud, like something had dropped onto the floor. Nadia's body reacted before her mind could. She stumbled back into the entryway, her breathing ragged, her phone slipping in her damp hands. She knew she had two choices: run for the front door and flee into the night, or confront whatever was upstairs before it came down. Both options were terrible, but the idea of stepping outside into the black, endless countryside with no signal and no one around made her chest tighten in a different kind of terror. At least in the house, she could see walls, furniture, something to cling to as real. She forced her trembling legs up the first few stairs, each one groaning under her weight like a warning. The closer she got, the louder the silence seemed, as if the house itself were holding its breath alongside her. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched ahead, cloaked in shadows. The faint glow from her bedroom lamp spilled into the hall, weak and uneven, as though the light itself was struggling against the darkness. Her heart pounded as she approached, her phone's glow bouncing shakily across the walls. The bedroom door hung open, just as she feared, the lamp inside flickering softly. She leaned closer, every nerve in her body on edge. From inside, she heard a low scrape, like fingernails dragging lightly across wood. Summoning every ounce of courage, Nadia pushed the door wider with the tip of her shoe, the hinges groaning as though protesting her decision. The lamp revealed the room just as she had left it, the bed neatly made, the window latched shut, her suitcase resting against the dresser. For one breathless second, she thought maybe she had imagined it all. But then, in the reflection of the window, she saw it, an outline that wasn't hers. A tall, unmoving figure standing just behind her, shrouded in darkness, watching. Nadia's breath caught in her chest as her gaze locked onto the window's reflection. The figure behind her was motionless, tall and indistinct, its features lost in the shadows. For a split second, she couldn't move, paralyzed by the image staring back at her. Then instinct took over. She spun around, her phone's weak glow cutting through the room, but there was nothing, only empty air and the silent furniture she'd already seen. Her heart hammered wildly as she swept the light back and forth, desperate for proof that she wasn't losing her mind. The silence felt heavier now, suffocating, and her thoughts spun in frantic circles. Had she really seen someone? Was it just her reflection distorted by panic? Her eyes darted to the window again, searching for confirmation. This time, the glass only held her trembling outline, pale and wide-eyed. Yet she couldn't shake the certainty that she hadn't been alone a moment ago. Her skin prickled with the memory of being watched, as though something had slipped away just before she turned. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked behind her. She whirled toward the sound, her phone shaking in her hand, but once again, nothing. The room was empty, the shadows still. But then came another noise, this one more distinct, the faint whisper of the guest room door at the end of the hall slowly swinging open. The hinges moaned softly, a sound drawn out and deliberate, like someone trying not to be heard. Nadia's stomach clenched. She knew she hadn't opened that door. She edged back toward the hallway, her bare feet silent against the wood, her pulse roaring in her ears. The guest room yawned open, darkness spilling into the hall like a living thing. She raised her phone to cast light inside, but the glow barely reached past the threshold. She couldn't see anything, just the edge of a bed frame and the suggestion of a wardrobe in the corner. But the smell hit her then, sudden and sharp, a faint, metallic tang beneath the musty air of the house, like rust. Or blood. Nadia's instincts screamed at her to run, to abandon the suitcase, the house, everything. But her body betrayed her, rooted in place as she stared at that yawning doorway. The darkness seemed to pulse with presence, waiting for her to make the first move. And then, low and unmistakable, a voice slipped out from the blackness, hoarse, close, and chilling, "You shouldn't be here." Nadia's chest tightened so violently she thought her lungs might collapse. The voice hadn't been imagined, it was too real, too close. Her phone trembled in her grip as she stared into the open guest room, the darkness inside absorbing the weak light like a sponge. "Who's there?" she whispered, her throat dry and cracked. No reply came, only the slow creak of the wardrobe door within, as if responding in its own mocking language. The sound was deliberate, undeniable. She took one shaky step back, the floorboard beneath her groaning like it too wanted her to flee. Her rational mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe the owner of the house had returned unexpectedly. Maybe someone had broken in and was squatting here, desperate and half-mad. The words in the guest book replayed in her head: charming solitude, cozy nights. What if they had all been written by the same hand, covering up something darker? The thought hollowed her stomach, but it was still easier to accept than the alternative, that the house itself breathed, whispered, and waited. She tried to steady her breathing, but every inhale sounded too loud in the suffocating quiet. The air shifted suddenly, colder, as if a draft had slipped from the room into the hall. Her phone screen dimmed again, and in her panic she fumbled to keep it alive, tapping it hard enough that it nearly slipped from her grip. When the light steadied, she caught something new, a faint outline inside the guest room. Not solid, not detailed, but a darker shape within the dark, just past the doorway. She blinked, her heart skipping a beat, but the form didn't move. It just stood there, silent and patient, as though it had been waiting for her to notice. She staggered backward down the hall, the boards crying out beneath her feet with every retreating step. The figure didn't follow. It didn't advance. It remained in the blackness, letting her retreat, letting her know it could stay hidden if it wanted. Nadia reached the staircase, her legs shaking so violently she thought she might collapse. She gripped the banister and took one step down, then another, until she reached the bottom. Her eyes never left the top of the stairs, waiting for that shadow to appear, but it didn't. Instead, the voice returned, quieter this time, almost coaxing. "Stay." The single word carried down the staircase, curling into her ears like smoke. Nadia's knees gave way, and she crouched at the foot of the stairs, phone clutched to her chest. She realized then, with terrifying clarity, that whatever was in that house didn't want to chase her away. It wanted her inside. Nadia's trembling hand hovered over the front door's lock, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Every nerve in her body screamed to get out, to run until her legs gave out. She twisted the deadbolt, wrenched the handle, and flung the door open. Cold night air rushed over her, carrying the earthy scent of damp soil and pine. For a moment, it felt like relief, like the house had finally loosened its grip on her. But as she stepped onto the porch, the night swallowed her whole, black and bottomless. The single porch light flickered overhead, throwing sickly halos of gold onto the gravel drive. Beyond its reach, the countryside was an abyss. Her car sat at the edge of the drive, a pale silhouette in the dark. She bolted down the steps, the gravel crunching like shattered glass beneath her bare feet. Each step forward made her feel more exposed. The trees loomed like sentinels, their branches twisting together to block even the moonlight. Still, she forced herself onward, fumbling for her keys in her pocket. Her fingers shook so badly she dropped them once, the sharp jingle echoing far too loud in the night. As she crouched to snatch them up, she froze, because the sound of gravel shifting hadn't stopped when she stilled. Something else was moving. Nadia whipped her head around, scanning the yard with her phone's glow. Nothing but empty grass, fence posts, and the faint outline of the farmhouse behind her. The porch light flickered again, dimming for a long second before buzzing back to life. In that brief dark, she could have sworn she saw a shape between the trees, tall, rigid, watching. Her blood turned to ice. She scrambled to her car, heart hammering, stabbing the key into the lock with trembling hands. The driver's door gave a stubborn click, then opened. She dove inside, slamming it shut and hitting the lock button 3 times, as if repetition might keep her safe. She shoved the key into the ignition, twisting desperately, but the engine groaned, coughed, and fell silent. She tried again, once, twice, 3 times, each attempt louder, more frantic. Nothing. The silence of the night pressed closer, thick with something unseen. She dared to glance at the farmhouse, its porch light fluttering weakly against the dark. And there, in the upstairs window of the room she'd fled, she saw it, the same shadowed figure, standing perfectly still, its head tilted as if watching her struggle. Her scream never left her throat. She slammed her fists against the steering wheel, fighting the rising tide of hopelessness. The car was useless, the night endless, and the house, her supposed refuge, was still pulling at her like a magnet. She could feel it in her chest, a sickening tug, as though leaving wasn't just difficult, but forbidden. Slowly, her breathing ragged, she reached for the car door handle. A voice brushed her ear, too close though no one was there. "Come back inside." Nadia's fingers trembled on the door handle, the voice still ringing in her ears as if whispered from the empty passenger seat beside her. She shut her eyes, desperate to believe it was her imagination. But when she opened them again, the figure remained in the upstairs window, still, unyielding, watching. The porch light flickered in rhythm with her heartbeat, casting quick shadows across the yard that made the trees seem to lurch closer. She couldn't stay in the car. The suffocating dark beyond the drive and the silent, oppressive woods pressed in on her, leaving her no options. Against every instinct screaming otherwise, she opened the door and stepped back onto the gravel. The sound of her bare feet crunching on the stones echoed like a warning. Each step back toward the farmhouse felt like surrender, as though the house itself had called her and she had no choice but to obey. Her phone's glow lit only a narrow path ahead, but the porch loomed larger with every step until she reached the door again. She forced herself not to look up at the window, though she felt its presence bearing down on her like a weight. Her hand shook as she reached for the knob, expecting resistance. Instead, the door swung open easily, as though it had been waiting for her. The moment she stepped inside, the air felt different. Thicker. Colder. The scent of damp wood was stronger, laced now with something acrid, metallic and sour, like the tang she had smelled near the guest room. The silence was not the silence of an empty home, but the silence of a place holding its breath. She locked the door behind her, though she had no idea why, whether it was to keep something out, or keep herself in. The faint creaks of the old boards beneath her feet sounded sharper now, more responsive, like the house was aware of her every move. She inched toward the staircase, her phone trembling in her hand, its glow throwing nervous shadows across the walls. That was when she noticed something she had missed before, the guest book on the entryway table, still lying open. Except now, the page was different. The neat, looping signatures were gone. In their place, new words had appeared, jagged and scrawled in black ink across the paper. Nadia leaned closer, her breath faltering as she read them aloud in a hoarse whisper. "You are not alone." Her hand jerked back instinctively, the book snapping shut on its own as though the house had slammed it closed. The sudden silence that followed was worse than any voice. It pressed against her ears, thick and suffocating. Then, from upstairs, the unmistakable sound of the wardrobe door in the guest room slammed shut, the echo rolling down the hallway like a gunshot. Nadia stumbled back against the wall, her phone nearly slipping from her grasp. She realized then that the figure wasn't waiting anymore. It was moving. Nadia's chest heaved as the echo of the wardrobe door slammed into silence. Her instincts told her to run, to bolt out into the night and never look back, but her body betrayed her, rooted to the spot. Slowly, as if pulled by invisible strings, she began ascending the staircase again. Every step groaned under her weight, the boards announcing her return to whatever waited above. The glow from her phone stretched only a few feet ahead, a frail weapon against the suffocating black. At the top of the stairs, the air felt heavier, colder, as if the house itself was exhaling against her skin. She stopped outside the guest room. The door was half closed now, the crack of darkness inside impossibly thick. The sour, metallic tang filled her nostrils, sharper than before, stinging the back of her throat. For a moment, she stood frozen, torn between retreat and discovery. Then the door creaked open on its own, as if inviting her inside. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she lifted her phone and shone the light into the room. The beam caught on the wardrobe first, its wooden doors tightly shut, their edges marked with deep scratches, like something had clawed to get out. Her light shifted across the room, catching the bed frame, the dust-draped quilt, the warped mirror leaning against the wall. And then, movement. In the farthest corner, just beyond the glow, a figure emerged. It wasn't quite human, but not entirely inhuman either. Tall, unnaturally thin, its limbs too long for its frame. Its skin, or what resembled skin, looked as pale and warped as old paper left in dampness. Its head tilted in the same slow, deliberate way she had seen from the window, but now there was no mistaking it. Two hollow, black eyes fixed directly on her, unblinking. The air left her lungs in a strangled gasp. She staggered backward into the hall, the phone nearly dropping from her slick hands. The figure didn't move quickly, it didn't need to. It only stepped forward once, its long foot dragging against the warped floor with a sound that made her skin crawl. The darkness seemed to thicken around it, swallowing the edges of her phone's beam. Then, in a voice that rasped like dry leaves, it whispered the same words she had already heard: "Stay." Nadia turned and ran, half-blind, her shoulder slamming into the wall as she bolted down the hall. The staircase blurred beneath her as she flew down, her lungs burning, her throat raw from silent screams. Behind her, the boards groaned under the weight of something following, not running, but walking, each step deliberate, inevitable. By the time she reached the entryway, her vision was dizzy with terror. The guest book lay on the table again, but its pages now gaped wide, every line filled with the same scrawled word repeated over and over, as if mocking her escape: "Stay. Stay. Stay." Nadia's chest burned as she tore through the entryway, the weight of the house pressing behind her like a tide that refused to break. The guest book snapped shut with a violent crack as she rushed past it, the echo trailing her steps like a slammed door. She yanked at the lock, twisting and fumbling, her vision blurred by tears. The front door finally gave, and she stumbled onto the porch, the cold night air striking her lungs like knives. For the briefest moment, relief surged through her, until she realized the night was not silent. Behind her, the boards inside the farmhouse creaked in steady rhythm, growing closer, deliberate as a predator that knew it couldn't be outrun. She leapt from the porch and sprinted across the gravel, stones slicing her feet. The trees loomed on either side, their branches knotted like claws overhead. Her car sat useless in the drive, its dead engine nothing more than a trap. She didn't dare glance back at the window, though every nerve screamed that the figure was still there, watching her flee. Instead, she ran toward the narrow road that curved away into the valley, her only chance of survival. The darkness clung to her, every breath ragged, every step pounding like thunder in her ears. When her legs threatened to give out, distant light appeared ahead, the faint beam of headlights cutting through the trees. Her heart soared with desperate hope. She stumbled into the center of the road, flailing her arms, her phone's dim glow waving like a beacon. The approaching car slowed, brakes squealing against gravel, until a pair of wide, shocked eyes stared at her from behind the windshield. The driver, a middle-aged woman, rolled down her window, her voice edged with alarm. "Are you all right? What happened to you?" Nadia could barely form the words. "The house," she gasped, pointing back toward the black outline of the farmhouse. "There's something in the house." But when she turned, the porch stood empty. The upstairs window dark. No figure. No flickering light. Just silence, as though the building had folded itself back into innocence, masking every trace of what she had seen. The driver followed her gaze and frowned, clearly skeptical. "Sweetheart, that place has been empty for years." No one's lived there since, she trailed off, her face tightening in unease. Since the last guest disappeared. Nadia's blood ran cold. She shook her head violently, insisting, "No, I saw it, I saw them," but the woman was already ushering her into the car, her voice calming, maternal, dismissive. As the engine rumbled back to life and the farmhouse receded into the distance, Nadia pressed her forehead against the glass, her body trembling. The porch light flickered one last time in the rearview mirror, as though waving her goodbye. And in that flicker, just for a heartbeat, the dark outline of the figure reappeared in the window, standing perfectly still, watching the road where its latest guest escaped.